Go. Hello and welcome to our show. This is Royal Oak Garage Beers. This is episode 4. We'll be talking about living with Trumpers today. It's hard to follow up after episode 3. I think our episode about manufacturing was our best one yet. Us Detroiters love talking about manufacturing. But yeah, as always, with you're joined today by myself, Stephen Arena, Eric Harrison, and Matt Wilkins. How you doing today, guys?
Doing
Doing
great.
well.
All right. So before we get into our main segment, let's hit the news. There's a lot to talk about. I know actually last episode we talked about redistricting. Matt, you described it as the great American pastime of gerrymandering, and it
Yeah, it's been
has,
there since like the founding of the Republic almost.
yes, well, it has come true. Texas is redistricting uh, their state to get some seats, and we have Gavin Newsom in California who's responding, which is kind of bringing up this larger dynamic of Gavin Newsom, who's making a lot of headlines recently, kind of adopting a lot of Trumpist techniques. I don't know, how do you guys feel about Gavin Newsom and all this retaliation that's happening and the redistricting in general?
Let me
Yeah, I
touch
mean,
on Gavin. Oh,
yeah,
okay.
go ahead. No, go
Yeah,
ahead.
so let me. So I think what he's basically fighting fire with fire, right? And I think that's kind of what it takes right now is we gotta fight back. Him personally, like he's okay. He has some good things and some bad things about him, but he's definitely fighting fire with fire, and that combative style I think has energized a lot of people. Again, it be a better person, absolutely, but I think the style and the just the fighting back means a lot to people.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of style over substance, right? But also like Trump is notoriously thin-skinned, right? That is something that is a characteristic of him. And by showing how thin-skinned he is, obviously makes a big political statement. Yeah, Gavin Newsom, he has a lot of pluses and minuses. He's like any politician, especially any Democratic politician. Everybody's always going to complain about their weaknesses. So there's no perfect candidate, there's no perfect, vanguard for the party, but it's kind of a breath of fresh air is how.
I definitely felt, motivated after hearing someone who's willing to, stand up and do something different and fight fire with fire, as Eric said. That was exactly the phrase that I was thinking of, fighting fire with fire. Um, so yeah, I'm also personally happy to see it. It's also funny to hear people's reactions and try to criticize him for the things he's doing. Um, it's just, hypocrisy, to no end.
So the funny thing is like a lot of people at Fox News don't understand that he's not imitating, he's making fun. They think he's imitating. And it just kind of like goes back, I just saw on the Blue Sky today, someone's like, "Oh, are the people at Fox News that dense?" And Ann Applebaum, who I really like, she's like, "Yes, they are that dense." So it's kind of funny of the ability to understand art. There's like some themes there, but anyways.
Yeah, satire is dead, right? Like for a big part of the population, they're like, so satire does not exist. Like it's like too complicated.
I think
Well,
there's
let's get to the gerrymandering piece. Is like one, I think that's incredible. Like we've always kind of had it to a degree, as Matt mentioned, but this is like just blatant. Go find me more votes. Like Trump was literally under investigation for this in Georgia, so this is democracy. It's probably close to democracy to destroying stuff. Like it just you know because we're everything's based on norms. Like this just completely destroys the norms, and it's just I don't know
I mean, it's
warfare by
making
other
it
means, as
worse,
Matt likes
right?
to say.
Yeah, or
Yeah,
it's
so it's
making situation worse, and then individual people feel like, well, why should I vote when the system is rigged against me? And so there's a corrosiveness
yeah, it's
to
it's insanely
elections.
corrosive, and also Republicans are actually in better shape because they have states like Ohio and Florida, and they have more states where they can do this, where they have the trifecta. So it's actually like strategically, it's just nasty. It's just bad stuff, and I guess I'll leave it at that.
when we also have more to worry about. There's the National Guard, which is currently in DC, right? And, I know Trump is planning other cities after that, which is to me a particularly concerning trend. Um, yeah, should I feel better about this? Help me out, guys. I mean,
I mean, DC is like weird because the federal, it's not a state. Because it has a lot more federal control. There's so
It's an easy
liberal.
target.
Yeah, it's an easier target. He has a lot more like personal executive authority to influence things. They're like President Wilson had at one point after he became president, this is after Reconstruction, he resegregates DC. So there's a lot of things that the presidents can do in DC that they don't have that kind of power when they influence and when they deal with states on kind of how the system of federalism works.
Yeah, so Stephen, to answer your question, should you be worried about this? The answer is absolutely. Like this is, if you go through your little are we an authoritarian regime checklist, like this is a big one. And now, like it's a small step, but this is absolutely a big one. And just kind of some other facts is like it's entirely false. They have this pretext about crime. So if anyone starts talking about is this about crime? Just write off their opinions. It's not if you think this is about crime, you're just a moron. Like I don't want any I don't have any words for you. Um and the fact that
But
there it's
crime and law and order is it's probably the only issue that Trump can use as a like strength in terms of politics land. Because you can't talk about the economy anymore because kick that right in the ditch because of all the tariffs and the uncertainty and everything changing every day. But like the I'm a law and order Republican still plays well. And so he's
yeah.
gonna play that card, you know, to death. He's gonna hammer that card to death.
So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out in like other cities, because like they said, like, there's going to be troops in well, first off, they didn't even go to the high crime areas in DC. They just like it's a show of power. So again, not about crime,
Yeah.
it is a show of power. If they send, to Chicago, if you go to downtown Chicago is like very, very safe.
Yeah.
The nasty parts in the south side of Chicago. So they're going to downtown. That's a clear way of where they actually go. There's not enough troops to actually do anything. 500 troops in downtown Chicago is like minuscule. It's not going to do anything. It's literally purely a show of force.
Yeah, and I mean Chicago has problems. Like I don't think we should not having police presence in cities, in urban areas has been a tool to weaken
But
communities
you're
and
using
attack.
his art like I
Yeah,
think you just need to cut this off as like this is not about crime at all. This is a
right.
show of force.
Yes. It's about, show of force and, the politics land of it. But
And
we
I
do
think how
have
we
to, yeah, no, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. And I think how we react to this is peaceful protest. Obviously, they're looking to be provoked, and then these are guys that signed up to go fight ISIS, right? They didn't sign up to do this. Like how does it feel to be a soldier and you have to be now you're a little toy, you're a little plaything for a guy who dodged the draft 5 times.
Yeah, I
Like
think
I
I
would
think
be
about that a
insulted. Like
lot.
yeah, like I would be insulted. Like you swore an oath to the Constitution, and now you got to go be this draft dodgers plaything. Like I would be insulted.
On one hand, if they came to Detroit, I would be really motivated to protest. And like you said, Eric, try not to give them ammunition, well,
That's
figurative
what they're going to
ammunition,
use.
right? Is to, not provoke some sort of fight of some sort.
Conflict,
But
yeah.
yeah, provoke. But at the same time, I think about those soldiers who, like you said, signed up to fight a war against our enemies, not common people. And I would really like it if those people stayed in the military, and I don't want I look I'm afraid that, the people who will sign up to do this stuff are people who are actually buying Trump's
It's
version of
ice. That's
reality.
ice. But I mean, these guys aren't
ICE.
ice.
Exactly.
Yeah. But and again, and they don't have the training or they don't have the stuff to fight crime. They have the stuff to kill people.
Yeah.
And so that's like another big problem. Like they're not actually, you know, crime fighters. They're warriors, and those are different things. Like
Yeah,
security and yeah,
soldiers are different, right? Everything like when you're a hammer, everything's a nail, right? You're
yep.
not trained, you're not involved with due process. You're not, it's a very different, terms of what
Trump wants to shoot protesters in the legs. He's literally said it. Like that is his goal. So anyways, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
So if they come to our city, protest, but, avoid provoking conflict is the ultimate goal.
yeah, yeah. I think
Yes.
it's, to peacefully protest and show that resilience, and resistance is important. Now, would they show up in Detroit is a big question because obviously Mike Duggan is currently running for governor as a third party candidate, but he is also funded by the Trump donor system. So is
Is
he
he
running?
really?
Yeah, that's what that's what's going on. I mean, he's been very
Oh my
Trump-esque.
God.
Yeah, so he's been very Trump-esque in terms of his tirades, being kind of sucking up to Trump about like, the recovery of Detroit couldn't have happened without, Trump's support. So what is actually going on with Duggan? Is he just trying to pull a spoiler because of, whatever? And I think he's done it, and I think he does deserve credit for that and supporting a lot of things with Detroit. Now, and Detroit has a similar problem to like a lot of big cities where the downtown core has recovered a lot more than the outlying cities. Detroit also has a different problem in that its geography, its Detroit is geography is just so big. So it's been a lot harder, and we've lost so much population. Or we in the last couple of years, I guess we've rebounded some population the first time in like basically since like the 50s or whatever, instead of just bleeding population. Um, so there's a lot of dynamics to Detroit which are a little bit different. But for example, I don't think Trump's going to put federal troops in cities that are friendly to them. They're not going to go into Birmingham, Alabama, for an example.
We'll see.
Yeah,
Let's
we'll see how
let's
this
wait and see. I
unfolds.
guess we'll find out, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on to our men's segment. We're talking about living with Trumpers. Um, I know we all have, I think, quite different viewpoints on this. And Eric, you're making a great point before the show that really there's been a void of information on how to interact with loved ones, strangers, acquaintances who are Trumpers. And so we're going to take a crack at sharing our experiences, giving some advice, some perspective. And so I'd like to start off with experiences or lessons that guide your viewpoints. And I'll actually go first. Um, One of the things that I think about a lot is a piece made by Vox where they talked about extremism and how uh, a person might turn to extremism or extreme ideas. And a lot of their main point was that a lot of the values we have are not processed by, the decision-making parts of our brain, the information parts of our brain. It's kind of processed by like the lizard part of our brain. And so a lot of times, um, I don't try to argue with people who have rather extreme ideas because it just won't work in my view. I prefer to think that these people who might have extreme right-wing views think that way because of the people around them and because of these like core values that have been ingrained in them. So I prefer to be generally hostile towards ideas, but not necessarily people. And I try not to, interact with people on the internet and try to like reason with them. I just don't think it's going to work. But yeah, that's kind of like for me, like my general viewpoint on Trumpism and how to interact with it. But Eric, or sorry, Matt, maybe you go next.
Sure. So, for me, I have a kind of delicate balance that I have to, you know, implement at work in terms of different people have different political views and political philosophies. And you have to work with people on like a day-to-day basis. And I'm in sales, right? So I have to deal with lots of different people. Um, and also with, say Canadian customers and stuff. And obviously they're much more upset with the Trump situation in terms of the complexity. Um, so for me, I try to offer people, different perspectives, different ideas, but you have to have they have to be intellectually curious on their side, right? Like so you can't just start spewing stuff if they're not interested in it and have a kind of closed-minded kind of perspective. So if they're willing to listen, you can have some dialogue and just try to give them some additional perspective. That's kind of how my approach is with just people um, that I deal with on kind of maybe a day-to-day basis, but not something that you bring up every day. You just try to offer them ideas and also try to tell them what you do. If that what your actions kind of speak louder than words in some respects for that kind of dialogue. On the other hand, with like my dad, he's not alive anymore, but my dad, was super into the tiny hands Trump. So even in 2016, the first time around, he Trump was his boy, right? So he was gonna be really excited about the victory. And the rule we made, so my mom was obviously not didn't have the same perspective, so she was very upset when Trump won the first time. And so for Thanksgiving, everybody was coming over to my house. So this is before I had kids. I was married, but before I had kids. So the rule we said was, hey, we're not going to talk about politics this Thanksgiving. We had this, contested election. Everybody's upset. Just not going to talk about it. And that was the rule. I said, hey, to bring up politics, I will kick you out. So we do the Thanksgiving. Um, my wife didn't like my dad for a whole host of reasons, most of them legitimate, of course, but didn't like my dad, and he basically abided by it until there was some discussion with my aunt, like her boyfriend at the time, or well, her boyfriend, and he brought up Trump. I gave him like the one warning. I was like, "Hey, we're not doing this." Brought it up again, and I kicked him out of Thanksgiving dinner. So that was, that's how
what happened after? Did he press it in family meetings after that, or did he like learn his lesson?
my dad never learned a lesson like in my lifetime. So my dad, there was like the way our relationship had to basically function is that my dad would be ridiculous. I would check him or intervene and say, you're not gonna like, I don't agree with that. He'd be super pissed at me and wouldn't talk to me for a little while. And then he would call me or talk to me or whatever. And we would just pretend like it didn't happen. Like that was the only, we had to just pretend the relationship was reset. And that was the only way that we could have a any semi-functional relationship with each other, is that just, we just let bygones be bygones. We just wouldn't bring that up again until he did something else ridiculous. Um, the My mom would also play much more the intermediary between us. And then when obviously she died, like, that kind of made it more difficult.
So has that experience made you uh, just kind of push out all political discourse from the family largely? Is that has taught
No,
you?
no, we still have, discourse. It's just for me, I can definitely understand where people have to cut some members of their family out because of the situation and the communication. It is a case by case basis. I don't think, people are complicated, right? So there's no one size fits all. Just like with parenting, there's not one size fits all approach that works for every child. Just like there's no one size fits all approach that works for everybody in terms of how you're going to deal with them with the whole Trump politics situation. Some people are just too toxic. They won't learn a lesson. They will just continue to push the boundaries. And, if people have to make that decision for their own self, their own mental health, to distance themselves out and put, guardrails and boundaries on that relationship, that is a totally reasonable thing to do if they don't respect those boundaries.
I mean, we'll talk about that, but first I want to give Eric an opportunity to talk about maybe some of his preeminent formative experiences or lessons that kind of guide him as he interacts with Trumpers or Trumpism.
Yeah, we only got 6 minutes left, so I'll try and make this fast. So one, I think my thinking on I've evolved on it a little bit, and I'll probably get to that at the end. But so going back to Steven said about the lizard brain, like it becomes parts of people's identity. And I will say, so when you're attacking those ideas, you're attacking them. And there's a concept called cognitive dissonance, and that's another piece is when you start saying, hey, you think this, but you also think this, and these things are wrong, and you can look at this, like you start breaking apart their worldview. You like literally start breaking apart their world and identity, and they get insanely angry. And whether to keep pressing when they're insanely angry, that's up to you. I've done it, and people literally threatened to cut my throat, like longtime friends, because I kept prodding on me because part of me I'm a little bit of an antagonist and I don't like to lose. But so anyways, yeah, that can go extremely south. So I guess early on in the conversation when you offer uh new facts and see how they react and feel it out. So the success story that I've had in talking to Trumpers is you kind of have to go on a path of discovery. So it's like, hey, you think this, I think this. Let's go look it up. Let's go find some things out. You know, do you agree that the Wall Street Journal is a reputable source? Do you agree? And try and find some common ground first and then go on a path to discovery. You're probably right, and you know you're right because you've looked this stuff up beforehand, so you know where this path leads, but don't tell them that. Don't tell them they're wrong. Let's go on the path of discovery. The downsides of this is it takes a really, really long time. Like I've took a Trumper to a I don't know who I'm going to vote for. It took over 4 hours of consistent talking about this. Oh, actually, I have another example. Yeah, one of my buddies, he was kind of like leaning Trump. It took 8 hours. It took eight. We were drinking beers during the day. He brought something up. We were looking stuff up and talking for 8 hours. So this is where I've evolved a little bit on it. I don't have 8 hours. So I kind of like pretty immediately if someone you give them some facts and they get angry, you know, just whatever, man. You know, it's not worth my time. There's a phrase I like. It's bless your heart, and it just you know it's condescending in a very slight way, and I love that. But like, just hey, bless your heart. You know, it just cuts the conversation off, and it's kind of like a little judo throw. But if you want to go through that 4 to 8 hour process of trying to convert someone through a path of discovery, like that's how long
They
it
still
takes.
they still have to have that intellectual curiosity to still have some
Yes.
open-mindedness to like, hey, what information can we agree that's a fair and balanced approach to, you know, looking into
Yes.
things.
And I
And
think
like, you know, another annoying thing I do is kind of lawyerly is you can say, oh, you do you agree with these val and I kind of like get some people to agree with some things beforehand. And then when they contradict themselves later, I say, well, you just said this, like what that makes them very angry, but I like doing that.
I think there's another element to this that I to your story that I like to adopt, which is kind of approaching this with a certain amount of goodwill. I think there's a lot of kind of combativeness to people's discussions, particularly on the internet. That is, hey, I'm going to show you that your ideas are wrong through force. And to me, that's just never going to work. Eric, when you mentioned your path of discovery, I think that really resonated with me because it was, a somewhat positive experience. Hey, let's talk about this in a shared values sort of way, as opposed to, hey, I'm going to beat your ideas with
Yeah.
information. I think there's two very different
The
approaches.
shared values thing is really important too. Like you got it like, hey, I really like America. You like America too. I like a strong economy. You like a strong economy too. And then yeah, and then go on the path to discovery. Yeah, it's a lot of work. And like, you know, I said how my thinking's evolved. Like I kind of don't have time for that anymore. And then like trying to convince people on the internet is like almost impossible.
Forget it. Forget
It's
it.
not
Almost
the right
impossible.
forum. You have to
Yeah.
be face to face. You
Yeah.
have to have a
Yeah, and like
human.
and these are people that I've been freaking roommates with. So it's like I have a year like an entire lifetime of experience with and like it took 4 to 8 hours. So if you think you're gonna convince some rando on the internet, like man, you're on something strong. I don't know.
And it could be a bot, it could be a Russian asset, it could be a million different
Yeah.
things.
Yeah. But
Bless your heart and get out.
as we talk about conversing with people on a personal level, Matt, you mentioned something about your professional life and how you converse with people on a professional or in a professional environment. Could you talk a little about that and maybe how you approach that?
So I approach that with just trying to give people different perspective in terms of like, hey, this is something, hey, there was a protest in DC that was a veterans protest. My father-in-law, former colonel, he went to that. People are like, what? There was a protest on D-Day? It shows that like, hey, oh, there's, there is other, like people that you would consider a patriot that would that are out there that are, struggling, that have different ideas, that want to, make the country a better place. My father-in-law took an oath to the Constitution. He takes that real personal. So, when people hear that, they kind of maybe think for a second, wait, why would he be protesting? What cuts did Dodge do to the Veterans Administration? Are these things good? Have any of the cuts to that Dodge has supposedly done been beneficial? Try but as we've talked about, it has to be a path of discovery. You have to have a dialogue, and you have to do it in a way that's not like, hey, here's my signage that I have in my front lawn.
Yeah.
This is how I'm going to change your life.
It also seems like you're just like sprinkling in some bits of other perspective, not to like, you know, argue with someone or try to convince them, but just kind of say, hey, there's other people that might think a different way, and I'm a very normal person, and this is the way I think, and I think that's kind of I do that as well with some acquaintances, just to uh, make sure they're not in a silo, I guess, and they kind of see other people that they might respect, they might think is a smart person and say, hey, I have these viewpoints, and maybe that just kind of makes them think a little bit.
Mhm. Yeah, I think so. Matt, I really liked your words. Let me offer a different viewpoint. I really like that. Two, the bubbles, like people's bubbles are really extreme right now. Like I remember reading something and like somebody's mom had just heard of Jeff Epstein like a month ago, right? So like people's bubbles are pretty extreme, and like what we have, we've been marinating on some of these ideas for months, years. Like you might give someone a nugget that they've like literally just, and they're like, I need to process that,
Mhm.
and that's, and I was thinking of that 8 hour conversation. I said to my buddy like, hey, look at the top 10 states for crime and look at the bottom, like the top 10 states for crime are predominantly Republican, the bottom 10 are predominantly Democrat, and he's like, what? Like this is counter everything I know. Like this changes, and I wasn't going to change his mind then, but I at least planted those seeds. And then the last piece was I'm going to put a concept around what Matt was doing. Is I read a study that was stats don't convince people, but vignettes, like little stories, are really persuasive. Those are like the most persuasive. So Matt's story of his father-in-law is a very persuasive. Here is a story of a person I know. So like I think certain people think in facts, like I think in facts, like a lot of people think. So you kind of have to figure out what flavor people like. Some people think in values, something in facts and statistics, some people think in stories. So you kind of got to adjust that based on who you're talking to.
I do want to take
Yeah.
a step back, though. We're talking a lot about persuading people to a new viewpoint. I think that is not the norm, right? It is not
Hmm.
very common. So we shouldn't expect that necessarily to be uh, a common occurrence or even like maybe even the path to success. Or I do want to ask you guys if you've ever had to, for example, respond by breaking ties with someone. I think this is pretty common in today's world that there's some of the extreme viewpoints that you say, hey, I just don't want to deal with you anymore, and maybe talk about that experience and any advice you would give.
Yeah, I mean,
All
for
right.
me, I almost did it with my dad. The only reason I didn't, because when my mom was on her deathbed, she said, "Please try to help your father." So I was like, "Man, mom, that's a big deathbed request right there." But I'll do what I can. And so, but I would have to take extended breaks, basically. And some people maybe that would work for some people and wouldn't work for others. But that's how I would just disengage for a time until like his battery died or some other more shit happened. You know, I had to do something.
Yeah, I've cut ties. I've definitely cut ties. Again, like I said, my thinking's evolved, and a couple years ago, like some of my friends like went on the Trump train, and one got off, the one that was kind of open-minded that had the 4 hour conversation. The other two are still like completely, and like they're not happy people. Like they are still very damaged, which I think attracts them to Trump because he gives simple solutions to complex problems. But like I cut him off. Um, and and I say that like very callous right now, but like that was very damaging. Like it really affected me. This has been years ago, but like it really affected me and it hurt. But I think it's the right move. And like, I go back, bring up Civil War stuff. But I mean, like we're not arguing about the marginal tax rate or public, people are like, oh, don't lose your friends over politics. Like this is literal democracy versus dictatorship stuff, and I'm willing to lose friends over that. And I've made new friends, and like life moves on. But like I think this is serious, and it's definitely worth cutting people off.
Yeah.
It's this some of this stuff is non-negotiable to me, and I mean that's how I treat it. And if like I said, lost some friends, it hurts, but that's just how it goes.
And I
Yeah,
think
and I can say my father-in-law, he distanced himself from a lot of his family, from his brothers and his mother, who's, obviously very elderly, and also from like his best friend that, he's had for basically his whole life. And he's distanced himself. He's only talked to his like his mom and his, former best friend a couple of times just about, if somebody's died, that sort of thing. So I mean, where somebody he was talking with every week, now he's talking to them, a couple times this year.
Yeah.
I think maybe you guys would agree with this, but it seemed like it was a last resort choice, right? You try to engage in some sort of common ground discourse, um, and then after that didn't work, or after there's some sort of ill will, you guys broke ties. Because I think that it should be a last resort in my view, because especially once you break ties with someone, you've no longer given them that kind of refreshing differing viewpoint. You've now like effectively siloed them, which is a thing we talked about is like a useful tool. They're siloed and they're going to be off in their far right wing land with other right wing minded people.
Hmm.
And then you've
Yeah, they're just gonna
basically,
drink the Kool-Aid. They're just
yeah.
fully in the Kool-Aid. They're not even drinking it. They're making a bath of the Kool-Aid. They're getting it in there. They're marinating.
But for your
Yeah,
own
it's
health, sometimes that's the right thing to do.
yeah, Steven, and kind of like we were talking about like the paths or people open to the path, like the people that are still open to new ideas and stuff, like I've not cut off,
Mm.
right? I've like maybe, not elevated their status or whatever, like I'm not calling up to hang out, but like I haven't cut them off. But I think that's the key is like, are they at least open to differences? Because I mean, one thing, and this is again authoritarian, right-wing authoritarianism 101, like they do not tolerate differences. And so like, yeah, it's just kind of nature of the beast and it stinks.
I
But
want
yeah,
to
I agree. It's definitely like the last wing. You should try last resort, but you should try and work with them.
I want to talk
Yeah,
about
I
one
mean, you
last
want to
dimension
help
of
people.
this. I'm
Yeah,
sorry, I do want to talk about one
oh
last
my God.
dimension of this. We talk about internet interactions because there's a lot of people out there who don't have, particularly based on where they live, they don't have normal interactions with people who have right-wing views. But they might have interactions with these people. They probably do because everyone's on the internet. Me personally, going on there, it's very difficult to not only see people on particularly Twitter, X, whatever, um, espousing extreme right-wing views, but also I see people who have, progressive or liberal views who are, I think, wasting a lot of energy trying to argue with people who have very conservative views. And so it's very like stressful for me, and I'm trying to be more resilient about it. Um, I don't know. I guess I wanted to share that with you guys. Wanted to get your internet experiences and advice you have about, discourse on the internet.
Uh, I guess my short one is you're wasting your time and like, you know, meeting with people in real life is vastly better use of your time. And like, yeah, I think it's largely a waste of time to be honest. I mean, not that like propaganda works. And if you have a passion for it, like you can do it.
Yeah, you
But
turn to Charlie Kirk, right? You do it the
yeah,
anti-Charlie
but
Kirk. And you could do
I mean,
that, like if that's what you want to spend your time doing. Like I don't go on
but
Twitter and
that's his
X.
full-time job. And like,
Yeah, he's full time. Yeah, you're a full time maggot, right? Like you're a monster. So you could,
yeah,
you could do that for yourself for monetary means. But like I don't go on Twitter or X or whatever. I mean, I think I still have a Facebook account somewhere like in the ether. I'm sure it tracks me in some kind of manner or way. But like I don't go on there. I don't read that. I guess I go on Reddit and stuff because it gets me news and I get to watch people like work on cars and stuff, so I do that. But and obviously like YouTube, because there's informative stuff, and when I break something, I sometimes have to fix it. So I use that.
yeah, Steven, I think it's just like it's definitely an uphill battle, and your time is better spent elsewhere. I guess would be that's my 2 cents. It's an uphill battle, and your time is better spent elsewhere, unless you literally want to dedicate like your life to doing that, which is like insane in my opinion. But
And I think I would, make a broader point about what I believe, which is, of course, the discourse on the internet and expecting to persuade someone into a different viewpoint on the internet is worthless. I think trying to persuade someone in real life is also maybe not even the path to success for, as we talk about our goals as a dad group and beating these authoritarian uh, efforts, right? National Guard in DC. I think that trying to persuade anyone with a right-wing view into a new way of thinking is not necessarily even the most worthwhile, uh, you know, most
Not a lot of
valuable
bang for your buck. Not a
use
lot
of
of
your
bang for your
time,
buck.
right? Yeah, there's a lot more valuable things we can do that are positive and countering to these bad ideas that are not necessarily trying to persuade everyone to thinking differently. And I think that's been really helpful to me is to think about it that way, that that's not the only solution. Do you guys agree with that?
Oh
Yeah, I
yeah,
think
yeah,
it,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. There's not a one size fits all approach.
Okay.
Yeah, but no, I totally agree. Like there's different bang for your buck, and arguing with people on the internet is probably one of the lowest bang for your buck. Now, like I said, we've seen how powerful that propaganda is. And that's I mean, literally that's kind of why we're doing this podcast right now is to give people some different takes, some inform and like they're like propaganda is not a positive or a negative term, like by definition. It's a way to convince people using emotion. But we do that using emotion, also using some facts. But yeah, like propaganda works, and unless you want to be a propaganda factory, like convincing people on the internet stuff. It's better to start with those kind of people who are open, and maybe you can take them, from pro-Trumpy to neutral or neutral to whatever.
To wrap up the show, do you guys have any last pieces of advice in a sentence or two with how to go about today's Trumpist
Information
discourse?
environment.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
Uh,
would
I,
say I base it on not what you say, but what you do. Just try to go out there and try to make positive change in people's lives. This is something my kids will be like, Matt, why do you always like this? Well, they don't say me Matt, but they say like, Daddy, why are you always trying to help people? It's like, well, you want to make a better world, you got to go out there and get your hands dirty.
I love it.
yeah,
I love it.
that's good advice, man.
Let's end on
Um,
that.
okay, sounds good. Yeah,
All right, guys. Thank you for listening in. Until the next time, we are Rolly Garage Beers. Bye bye.
that's like
Uh,
bye.